Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It's October 1st, and today we're going to take a look at the astrology of October. So it's a very big month of October, mostly due to the retrograde of Venus in Scorpio, which is something I've talked about a few times already. In several previous videos in the last couple of weeks, I've talked about Venus's upcoming retrograde. And that's definitely center stage for the month ahead. However, there is an amazing lineup of planetary transits between October 10th and 11th that are probably just as powerful in some sense as the overall effect of Venus retrograde this month. So a lot of different things to look at this month. I'm going to go through my list of big transits. And then you can also, every month, you can always check out my monthly sun sign horoscopes. You can read for your sun or your rising sign. Some people even read for their moon sign. Those will be up on my YouTube channel later today. And then you can always read the written version of my monthly horoscopes on astrograph.com. So I'm going to put that into the chat box right now. If you go to astrograph.com and you check out the horoscopes section, and you go to October's horoscopes, and you'll see the glyphs at the top of the page for all of the different signs. And if you click on those glyphs, you'll see a long horoscope for the month written, and you can read again for your sun or your rising sign, or sometimes even your moon sign. Those are up every month on basically the first of the month, so you can read those on the first of the month. I also try to have out my video versions of my monthly horoscopes, which are based on those written ones, and then this large video looking at the mundane astrology for the month ahead. So that's what I've got for you guys today. All right, let's get started. So the month really begins on October 2nd, even though today is the first of the month, and the calendar month gets started today, but tomorrow is really when the astrology gets rolling for the month. Mercury in the sign of Libra will be making a square to Pluto in Capricorn. Now, I'm not saying anything new when I say that we've had a dramatic past week in the news, at least here in the United States, and I try not to get too sucked into it, because it's really, like, to me, it's very stressful to get my mind and my emotions overly engaged in those things constantly. But it's been a dramatic week with the Supreme Court nomination here, and lots of other issues surrounding that, the Me Too movement, and the FBI getting involved, and partisan politics, the whole thing. It's just been really intense. Well, this has been in large part because the planet Mercury in the sign of Libra, the balance, the scales of justice, truth, fairness, equality, etc., has been moving into a square with Pluto and Capricorn. And so you're looking at ideas of fairness versus power and tradition. You're looking at the corruption of a system and a tradition, Pluto and Capricorn, and you're looking at a moment of, in a sense, a moment of reckoning, a karmic crossroads of some kind in U.S. politics. It has that kind of feeling to it. But it's very simply, in the astrology, you're seeing Mercury, which is about communication, and it's about, in Libra especially, it's about truth-telling. And you're seeing Mercury squaring Pluto as the opportunity for a deeper kind of truth-telling, for deeper revelation of truth to come forward. There's also the opportunity to become a more balanced, kind, fair, reasonable communicator in relationships by looking at communication patterns right now, by being willing to be authentic, deep, revealing, honest. There is an opportunity for our communication dynamics in relationships to really change. That's all happening over the first few days of the month, perfecting tomorrow, but in effect today, in effect through the week. So you can ask the simple question, how can I be more considerate or more concerned with the other? And in my speech, and in the way that I think, in the way that I evaluate, in the way that I judge, so much of the way that we live our lives day to day is based on evaluating things and trying to do the right thing or make the right appearance or say the right thing. And we're evaluating everything that we do and everything that we should do based on ideals of what things should look or feel like. But it's something else to be genuine and to be honest and to embody whatever we're doing. So the other thing you have to be really careful for is that Mercury square Pluto from the sign of Libra is sometimes idealistic. Sometimes it's about political correctness or being PC. And this could be a moment where we have to remember that getting it right, being perfect, doing the right thing doesn't really mean that we're having a change of heart. It doesn't really mean that we're having a change of mind. So it's also about, again, authenticity and figuring out how we can shift communication patterns in relationships, not just to get it right or do it right or to be more considerate in some kind of artificial or idealistic sense, but so that we can really be in our heart and really care about others and really listen and really evaluate things both from the head and the heart at once. So that's something to think about with Mercury square Pluto. But you can also see things like those intense communication dynamics in all different kinds of relationships. The email you get that's kind of deep and heavy and intense, you got to respond to diplomatically, dealing with complications with contracts, changes regarding technology or communication, the desire to purge and create a more balanced environment so that your mind can be clean and clear. These are things that Mercury and Pluto square to one another can also provide us with. Mercury in Libra loves a balanced space. For the mind to be clear, the space has to be clear. Our environments are often an extension of the internal life, especially the life of the mind. And so if your external space could use a little bit of sprucing up, or if your external space could use some organizing or arranging, just know that it's also a great time to find mental clarity by just looking at the space around you and just asking, how could I create a little bit more balance, a little bit more cleanliness? That's Mercury in Venus's sign right now, with Pluto saying, you know what, if the structure around me changes a little bit and it gets a little bit more balanced, maybe my mind, my mental state will also have the opportunity to get a little bit clearer. So Mercury square Pluto to start the month. You're also going to see controversial things being said, controversial statements being made. Don't be surprised if you see some Twitter controversy or some kind of slip of the tongue, or the way that these days, of course, people say things, and so much is there's such a trigger for words and language in social media and online, and in many ways we have become more sensitive, which is maybe good, but on the other hand, in some ways we've become so idealistic about communication that we judge one another based on words rather than hearing the content of the heart, which is sometimes different than the words that are being said. Even though the words being said may come across sometimes in a manner that maybe we miss the mark somehow with our words, but we can't ignore the heart. So make sure that we also distinguish right now, again, between the heart and the actual language. So on October 6th, this is the big one. Venus turns retrograde in Scorpio on October 6th. You're going to circle that on your calendar. This is turning retrograde in Scorpio. It's in the sign of its exile or detriment. It's a very difficult, challenging place for Venus, despite what anyone says to try to whitewash it or make it sound really, really positive. Of course, positive things can come from it, of course. There's depth, there's transformation, there's honesty, there's getting into the shadow work of our relationships. There's evaluating things in our life, especially our material values, desires, relation to our style, our wardrobe. I mean, it can be really mundane. It can be really deep and emotional within our relationships. But either way, when Venus is in a Mars ruled sign like Scorpio, you're dealing with the tension between Mars and Venus, and you're dealing with it in a way that's a little bit more confrontational, a little bit more challenging. Last time we had this, you go back to the fall of 2010, and that was the last time Venus retrograde in Scorpio. So you can often you can see the themes of uh, conflicted values in relationships with others, confronting those things, and trying to do so in a peaceful way. But also there can be some emotional entanglement and complexity, and but also catharsis. There can be strong feeling of, especially if you're a Venus ruled sign, like if you're a Taurus, if you're a Libra, if you have a strong Venus in your chart somewhere, and you really identify with Venus, this can be a time where you are going through a shift of your internal sense of who you are, of what you value, of what you like, or what you feel harmony with around you and what you don't. And can be pretty intense. And again, the retrograde is already a challenge for Venus. It's already a time of transformation, a sort of death and rebirth, as Venus is now descending into the underworld from the evening star position, falling down into the sun. So Venus things are, in a sense, dying. They're ready to fall away, and something is ready to be reborn in the Venusian world of symbolism: relationships, agreements, harmony, love, beauty, taste, style, desire. All of these things, they're ready for some kind of review or some kind of transformation. Again, in a Mars ruled sign, a little bit more confrontational, a little bit more emotionally complex, but good, healthy for us if we're willing to go through it and, be real with ourselves about it. So that's October 6th. Venus is turning retrograde in Scorpio, and will be retrograde all the way until, I think it's November 16th. It's about the middle of November. And we'll dip back into late Libra for a bit of the transit. But October is all about Venus retrograde. So again, I recommend that you check out the horoscopes of the month, which I'll be putting up. Sun sign horoscopes will be up on my YouTube channel a little bit later today. And then you can see for yourself, especially if you're a Libra or a Taurus, that's your ruling planet. So you definitely want to take a look at that for sure. Also, if you have Scorpio ruling an angular house like 1, 4, 7, or 10, going to be a lot more powerful. The angular houses tend to really make noise. So Venus retrograde, it's a big deal. I will be doing one more video on Venus retrograde around the time that Venus turns retrograde at the end of the week. So we'll take one more in-depth look at that. Then on October 8th, the new moon falls in Libra. So the new moon in Libra is a further emphasis on the Venusian themes this month. You have a new moon in a Venus-ruled sign, Libra. So the idea of balance, harmony, the search for diplomacy, fairness, truth, justice, balance, beauty, harmony in relationship is emphasized once again through the new moon on October 8th. Between now and October 8th, it's very interesting that the moon cycle is decaying, right? So we're going through last quarter moon to start the month, and then we're just going right down into the depths. And the first week of the month, including Venus retrograde, is happening under the dark moon. So there's this real feeling of things, things really turning inward as things are also falling apart and being let go of. And then the platform for new growth in the month ahead, starting on October 8th with the new moon, is all about redoing Venus things. It's all about revising, revisiting themes from the past sometimes. But overall, the new moon is kind of auspicious because, remember, this Venus retrograde is going to end in Libra, where Venus will be back in her rulership out of her detriment in Scorpio, where it's a little bit more tangly. So overall, the opportunity for restoring harmony or creating a new form of harmony and peace and accord in life is there this month. But it's going to take a little bit of work. And the first, even right after the new moon, the first 10, 11 days of the month of October are going to be more intense and challenging, just due to the heaviness. They got Mercury square Pluto, Venus retrograde in Scorpio, new moon in Libra, and then October 10th, right as the moon is starting to show its first light, it's it is like a whirlwind of transits. So check this out. October 10th, Venus in Scorpio will square Mars in Aquarius. So you've got a Venus-Mars square happening just at the same time as Mercury is opposing Uranus. So when Venus squares Mars on October 10th, this is a dance that Mars and Venus have been doing with each other for a while due to the retrograde of Mars and now the retrograde of Venus. So there is sexual and creative tension in a Mars square Venus dynamic. There is hostility in relationships. There's confrontation in relationships. There is that I want to do something peaceful versus that I need to confront something more assertively or aggressively. How do I navigate a difficult situation at work or at home or in my love life or with my siblings or my kids or whatever kinds of relationships in life? How do I address something, some kind of change that needs to be made where a certain amount, I have to assert myself, stand up for something, advocate for something, all Mars kinds of things, but I have to do it in a way that is aimed at creating lasting peace and union. That's Venus in the mix. Now, Venus is in Mars's sign, so there's some reception between the two of them. On the one hand, Venus is superior to Mars, but Venus is in Mars's sign. So you can think of Mars as in Venus in some ways as exerting a kind of pressure on Mars right now, and also Mars sort of having some power over Venus. So there's kind of in relationships, for example, you're going to see the need for something that is being argued for. Like, we need to do this for greater peace or greater happiness, or this needs to be done for the sake of greater clarity or healing or greater productivity or whatever, something that needs to be done for the sake of a good result or a more beneficial result. That's the kind of pressure Venus will be placing. But Mars may be fighting it. Mars may be resistant to it. Mars may be feeling like, I want to do something different, or I'd like to do something that's more independent. And so there's going to be a real push-pull. Some kind of compromise is needed, obviously, but a level of confrontation is going to be unavoidable. Now, this is also about creative and sexual tension, which can be very productive. So that creative sexual tension can be about falling in love. It can be about addressing your desires and your physical body and how you experience pleasure in the body. So that's about sexual healing. If it's about addressing trauma that lives in the body, if it's about trying to find healthy creative outlets for, physical energy that's in the body, creative energy, sexual energy, and finding a healthy way of bringing that forth versus, having a one night stand that makes everybody feel awful afterward or something like that. You know what I mean? So it's that kind of that moment around October 10th, Venus square Mars. I mean, remember, this is right out the gate of the Venus retrograde. It's right after the new moon in Libra. So Venus and Mars stuff are really going at it this month. We can see that in the news. Look at what's headline right now in the US, right? It's all about the relationship between men and women, and Venus is asserting pressure right now. But think about it. In a sense, she's in Mars's house, right? So this is just I don't want to talk about, I try not to devolve into talking about politics, but when you look at the doctor who offered her testimony this past week about her sexual trauma with the Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, she's kind of in the house of the enemy, right? She's Venus. She's in Mars's house. Mars is the dominant, assertive status quo, the power structure, the one who has authority and power. It's Mars right now in a Saturn-ruled sign of Aquarius. That's the dogma of the institution. Now, I know a lot of people like to think about Aquarius as countercultural and radical and revolutionary. That's really not how to understand Aquarius from my perspective, especially not when you study traditional astrology. Aquarius can be very revolutionary, but is also a Saturn-ruled sign and is very intimately connected to dogma. and institutions, just as Capricorn is, but in slightly different ways. More on that some other time. Mars is in a Saturn-ruled sign. Venus is in Mars's house in Scorpio. So it's like the woman being in the house where all of the men hold the power. And she's approaching and placing pressure, bringing an accusation, bringing a story, bringing a charge against someone within that power structure. And she's in the superior position. I mean, she's making a superior square to Mars. So she has the power over Mars in a sense right now, and yet she's in Mars's house. That's exactly the kind of dynamic that's going to be really intensely unfolding between now and the first 10 days of the month, growing even stronger as Venus turns retrograde and then hits the square to Mars, and there's a kind of showdown. Now that's, as the way I have it, that's about another, not this week, but next week, where things will really be churning. With Venus retrograde, that would also suggest to me that the FBI investigation may be delayed a little bit. Retrogrades often indicate delays. I did a horary for the, will Brett Kavanaugh get the nomination? And it was, he was actually Venus, his signifier in the horary was Venus retrograde in the 12th house, and Venus about to turn retrograde in the 12th house. So I had judged it, either the trial will be, or the vote will be delayed, or he will not get it. And of course, it's hard not to be, that reflects some of my own bias, but the important thing is I had made that judgment prior to the FBI investigation being announced. And so far the Venus retrograde symbolism in that horary that I did certainly had a role to play within the delay signature. That's something else you can think about, is that relationship confrontations are in the air, but they could also delay things. Like if you're trying to make an agreement with someone or come to terms on something right now, there could be some sticking points and some potential for delays that are sort of there with Venus turning retrograde. And remember, things can also devolve very quickly with this dark moon energy at the beginning of the month. Now, as if this wasn't enough, right? That's October 10th, with Venus and Mars squaring one another. On the same day, October 10th, Mercury opposes Uranus. So here you have a planet that represents the mind, the messenger, the interpreter. It's related to technology, speech, communication, the intellect. And that planet will be opposing Uranus, planet of rebellion, sudden disruptions or changes. So this is a very interesting time. Definitely going to be news or information coming to us that's outside of the box, that's unexpected, perhaps very inspiring. The opportunity for epiphanies, breakthroughs in awareness or understanding, but also the potential to really put your foot in your mouth, saying things, bucking the tradition, bucking the authority that could get you into a little bit of trouble if you're too impulsive. On the other hand, it's a great moment to sort of speak your mind and do so in a way that inspires, that rouses other people to learn and grow mentally, to see things in a different way. It's a very inventive transit. Wouldn't be surprised if we saw in the news around the world the announcement of different kinds of technologies or different advancements in technology or science being announced. But that's a very sort of mentally fast and unpredictable energy that's coming through at the same exact day that Mars and Venus are squared to one another. So I'm telling you, this October 10th, 11th moment of the month is just popping. Then you go to October 11th, as if all of this isn't enough, and then the Sun squares Pluto on October 11th. So for solar figures, right? For solar figures, this is a moment of reckoning. For authority figures, this is a major moment of reckoning. This is Sun in its fall in Libra, square to Pluto, Lord of the underworld. This is a moment of judgment, and this is a moment of potential reform and a moment of karmic reckoning. It's also a moment where solar figures like leaders, CEOs, men in power, fathers, grandfathers, solar paternal figures can go through a death and rebirth, can go through a healing crisis. There can be a really powerful emphasis on illumination, insight, and awakening. The sun represents illumination and enlightenment. It's our spiritual sense of intelligence. The sun square Pluto can be about things that come up that we have to face or deal with, but that give us greater awareness and wisdom. So it's a potentially very enlightening transit, but also heavy as it's square to Pluto, and will definitely challenge the ego, will challenge authority structures, and will involve those death and rebirth themes. And this is pretty fast-moving stuff, right? So it's hard to give it fair treatment without exaggerating what it will be, to bring it to life, but also remember that these things happen in the course of like 3 or 4 days. And unless it's corresponding with something really powerful going on in your birth chart, it may not be the world's biggest deal to you personally, you know, but it's important to, you know, you mark these things down and just follow them every month. You'll learn astrology really quickly. Okay, so that's October 11th. Then things start to quiet down relatively, like a bit. October 19th, Mercury is going to square Mars. Mercury in Scorpio will square Mars in Aquarius. This is on this very, like, following on the same themes of the month. It's a confrontational energy with Mercury, as it was with Mercury opposed to Uranus on October 10th. On October 19th, Mercury in Scorpio will square Mars in Aquarius. So it's that similar combative, incisive, analytical, intense, sort of confrontational mental energy. You have to be careful of getting agitated or inflamed or triggered or, you know, provoked into an unnecessary conflict of mind, speech, debate. Be very careful about online conflicts around that time, or that social media debate that takes up 2 hours of your day and you just never should have gotten involved, you know, like but the Mercury square Mars is also about learning. It's about breaking things down and understanding them. It's about trying to analyze or deconstruct to get to the root of a problem. It's about speaking the truth and trying to do so with emotional depth and authenticity at once. So this Mercury square Mars dynamic on October 19th is can help you get down to the essence of things mentally and emotionally. But again, it's more confrontational, and everything is like that this month. Thankfully, we have a lot of Libra in the air, which is, and Venus will eventually get back into Libra. And so there is this simultaneous theme of balance for a little bit. But then once you get into more of that Scorpio energy and stuff like that, by the end of the month, we're squarely in Scorpio season, and you know, it's going to be an intense month. Anyway, so that's Mercury square Mars on October 19th. Betty is saying a lot of fixed sign involvement with Aquarius, Scorpio, and Taurus. Yeah, and fixed energy is the best way of I like to think about it is the fixed signs, or what were traditionally called the solid signs. They don't move easily. It's like if you're talking about karma, you're talking about something that's kind of a long, slow burn, or you're getting down to deep convictions and deeply held beliefs and ideals and challenging those things, or deeply held patterns. And when deeply held things are all kind of squaring off, opposing one another, etc., it feels more, it can feel more intense than usual, because it feels like you're being challenged, or you're challenging someone on a more fundamental level sometimes. So the fixed energy definitely adds to what's likely going to be a pretty intense month. The good news is that in November, things are going to lighten up quite a bit as Venus turns direct, and then Jupiter finally moves out of heavy, deep, watery Scorpio and into its home fire sign of Sagittarius. And that should lift us in a certain way. The return of hope, the return of spirit of adventure. Later this month, Sean Nygaard, who's one of my favorite astrologers and just all-around awesome person, is going to be giving a talk on Jupiter's entrance into Sagittarius, and that's a part of my fall speaker series. We also, if you're feeling like you're in the midst of a heroic journey into the underworld, you can also tune in later this month to Becca Tarnas give a talk about the astrology of J.R.R. Tolkien. So, getting into a little bit of Middle Earth and the Lord of the Rings, the journey of the ring, that might be appropriate for this month, given how much intensity there's likely to be. And then Chris Brennan's coming in and giving a talk too. So you can check those out on my website under the events page. In fact, if someone's listening right now and wouldn't mind texting into the box the link to the events page on my website, I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, finally, the full moon of October 24th will conjoin, I mean, listen to this. So there's full moon in Taurus. The full moon in Taurus is conjoined with Uranus and opposite the Sun and Venus retrograde in Scorpio. And then by the 30th, Venus retrograde in Scorpio will oppose Uranus. So that last week of the month, like, should be a pretty interesting Halloween. I'm guaranteeing there will be some interesting Halloween drama this year with Venus in Scorpio retrograde opposite Uranus, right? Can you imagine what kind of cool costumes you're likely to see? All right, but at any rate, this last piece of the month, the energy is all about the standoff between Taurus and Scorpio. So an exalted moon in Taurus, and it's with Uranus, demanding change, but doing so in a Venusian way. It's opposite Venus in Scorpio, as Venus is Scorpio sort of finishing up and moving retrograde to back out of Scorpio. It's a kind of grand finale of this intense Venus retrograde in Scorpio energy. You could think of it as, I like to think of the Buddha when I think of the relationship between Taurus and Scorpio. Buddha was said to be born under the full moon in Scorpio, so Taurus sun, Scorpio moon, but we're reversing it, but it's very similar. Here you have the Buddha who sat under the Bodhi tree seeking enlightenment. So he sits on the earth, very Taurian thing to do, and refuses to move until, he reaches enlightenment. And he's tempted by the demons and faces the temptation of the darkness. The Buddha is, of course, about the golden mean, but the Buddha's teachings are also about fear and impermanence and the transience of this world. And so those are Scorpio themes. That's the deep autumnal energy of Scorpio. It's the releasing, the dying, the letting go, and the confrontation with death that's difficult, the things that we do to guard ourselves against loss. Something that I was saying over the weekend, I spoke at this astrology summit, and they were talking about how to get rid of fear. And I kind of just blurted out in my sort of my own, I have a Sun Uranus trine, so I can sometimes be sort of rebellious. And I sort of blurted out, I was like, fear is healthy. And everyone's like, what? Fear is healthy? And I was saying, well, it's natural, right? It's instinctual. It's a part of life. It's a part of what holds life together. The Buddha said that, basically everything that we hold dear is made of fear. So when I have moments with my daughter of loving her so much, I recognize the presence of not wanting to lose her, of it being so precious, of the fear and longing and sadness in knowing that it's temporary. And that's part of that, is that there's a holy kind of fear within there. There's a kind of sacred awe and trembling fear before the universe. There's a sense that everything is fragile and ultimately impermanent. And there's a holy, sacred version of fear that goes along with that, as well as, being afraid of fear, being resistant to change, not having a healthy relationship with fear. We grip and grasp and try to hold everything. And we become, in a sense, our fear makes us inhuman, because being fully human means embracing the reality of fear and loss and change. And we have to be hold it close. That reality keeps us awake. And so the Buddha was someone who taught these things and embodied them in the way that he taught, and of course was thought to be born under the Scorpio-Taurus full moon. So when these things come up, when the Scorpio-Taurus axis comes up, what you're thinking about is you're thinking about those dynamics being really pronounced. I want to hold something. I want to make something solid and lasting and enduring and beautiful and, stable. On the other hand, there's this Venus retrograde energy. I want change. It's death, it's impermanence, it's loss, it's grief, it's surrender. And those two energies are really, they're pushing and pulling with one another. It can be very creatively productive time, very healing time, if we allow for the changes to occur. If we don't, there's a fine line between allowing changes to occur and then sort of obsessively or impulsively trying to provoke change. Sometimes we also try to provoke change because we think, well, if I provoke change, it'll lead me to peace, truth, or certainty quicker. So there's a wisdom in being in the tension of the opposites and being in the fire of the opposites, being in their opposition with one another without trying to whitewash it and make it something shiny and nice and productive and a nice outcome and everything like that. Being torn apart by the opposites is part of what it means from Carl Jung's standpoint to be we are sort of crucified upon the opposites, each of us internally, as we find our own kind of inner Christ consciousness, you could say. We have to be split apart in some ways by the opposites in order for something new to be born within us, or to be awakened to our spiritual nature. So these oppositions that we're seeing at the end of the month between Taurus and Scorpio, really pronounced, as will the desire to collapse into one extreme or the other as a way of quickly solving a tension that we just don't want to be in. So it's very important to try to be with it, be with whatever it is, and try to hold the tension and don't make quick or hasty decisions. On the other hand, with Venus at the very end of the month opposing Uranus, there's maybe an opportunity for severing, separation, sudden disruptions or changes in relationships. Sometimes it's time. It's like when the toast pops up from the toaster, right? It's just like it's done. It's cooked. The thing is, the alchemy is complete, and there's a reaction. There's a sort of chemical reaction. Sometimes we can't do anything about that either. But you'll know coming through the full moon at the end of the month that there's a kind of a pressure cooker and some substantive alchemy that's ready to change. But remember, Venus retrograde all the way till the middle of November, really impulsive changes around Venusian things like relationship, style, wardrobe, appearance, material things, values, etc., etc. If you make it really impulsively and you think, if I just rearrange the external details, it'll fix an internal problem, almost always it will lead to having to revise again later, because the transit is really at its best when it's tuning us into the need for a shift, but that shift starts in the inner life. And then as the retrograde resolves itself, the clarity about how to execute that interchange in the externals becomes more apparent. That's what I've seen time and time again with retrogrades. So that's what I teach. But, I can't wait to hear your stories, all of you, and what you're going through. I love hearing from people and hearing how the retrogrades come along. So it's a very busy month. I'm really looking forward to it. I like these kinds of changes and challenges. I don't like to whitewash them and say, oh, Venus retrograde in Scorpio is so lovely. No, I don't like to put it that way, but I don't like to make it sound like nothing good can come of it either. So for me, I'm cautiously optimistic about this month, but I'm also approaching it with a healthy amount of fear and reverence, because it keeps us awake. It's alerting us to something. And when we're alert to something, we often can make changes in a very healthy, careful way. There's a sort of prophetic quality to Venus and Scorpio right now. It's like the herald of change. You better pay attention. Let me give you a quick example of how there's a really simple example. I'll go back to politics one last time. When the Republicans knew that they were going to have to, these Republican men in this hearing were going to have to question this doctor who came forward with an accusation against the Supreme Court nominee of sexual assault. They hired, because they're all men, they were like, oh boy, the optics might be bad on this, so they're going to hire a female prosecutor to ask her the questions, right? Which they then abandoned when it came to talking to Kavanaugh himself, a man. But that's the kind of, just that moment, like when Venus is in Scorpio, it's like, you better be a little careful. Better listen, because Venus is powerful in this position, but she's also not messing around, and that's a tricky place to be in for everyone. But if you avoid it, it can look worse. You try to avoid it, it can look a lot worse. If you don't take it seriously, it can also be bad. If you know what I mean. So it's a prophetic kind of Venus right now. You have to listen to whatever she's saying. And the prosecutor didn't go where they wanted either. Yeah, that's right. Very good point, Betty. Okay, so I promise I won't talk too much about politics. I get so much negative feedback from people after I talk too much about politics that I've learned over time that it ends up creating division among my readers and everything like that. So I try to talk about it where it feels like it's important, and otherwise just, make the obvious connections that can help illuminate us. But at any rate, so at any rate, I hope you guys have a great month, and stay tuned again for my live. I'll be updating on my YouTube for my October's sun sign horoscope videos, and you can again go to astrograph.com to check out my written column. So hope y'all have a great week, and good luck with the Venus retrograde. Take care, guys. Bye.